Good afternoon. Welcome to our program today. I'm Angela Greiling-Keene. I am the president of the National Press Club Journalism Institute, and I am a deputy managing editor at Politico, where we do lots and lots of policy coverage. So I'm looking forward to the program today myself. Thank you to all of you who already are National Press Club members who are here. We have a lot of you in our audience, and for those of you who are not, if you're interested in National Press Club membership, please see one of our staff people today. We do lots of training like this, as well as many other events and networking. The program that we have today grew out of interest from members and from editors here in DC and elsewhere who told us they wanted training to help humanize policy coverage and extend its reach. We hope that today's program will be an interactive program where you're actively engaged and asking questions throughout. You've received a card when you came in that asked you to tell us what you'd like out of today's program. So please take a moment to fill that out and give it to one of our staff members. You'll hear today from Andie Coller, who planned this program along with the Institute, and she'll keep things moving. Andie is a former reporter and editor who's worked at Politico. She's been a deputy editor at National Journal magazine and national audience editor at McClatchy. Andie will focus today on how you write policy stories that engage the public. We'll take a short break during today's program, and then after that, you'll hear from Sarah Cliff, the New York Times investigative reporter who is good at connecting personal stories and public policy. She'll talk about when and how to do that, where to find people who can help you do that sort of connecting. Sarah's work at the New York Times focuses on the American healthcare system and how it works and, in many cases, doesn't work for patients. She's previously written for Vox, The Washington Post, and for Politico. After Sarah, you'll hear from Ben Weider, and he'll do a hands-on session on finding and interpreting data that your readers need, how to determine whether the data tells you what you think it does. Ben is a data reporter at McClatchy, and he's worked previously at the Center for Public Integrity and Stateline. We have tables set up that many of you are already taking advantage of for that session, and you're welcome to use your laptops to use data in the moment during Ben's session. If you need to get up and stretch during the program, take a call or use the restrooms, please do so quietly. The doors in the back are open, and for any restroom needs, it is down the hall to my left and then an immediate left at the ATM. At this point, I'll turn the program over to Andie, who will take it from here.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. So just to let you know, this part of the program, it will be interactive, but not, you won't need your laptops for it. So I feel like I should be a fish and have one eye on each side right now. Anybody who wants to leave their laptop there and move to the center for now, you can do that. Welcome to How to Write Policy Stories That Engage the Public. A couple of things you should know about me. I am a native New Yorker, so I talk fast. I'm also an introvert, so I tend to talk quietly. So if you need me to slow down or speak up, please let me know. I'm going to start today with a definition and a confession. First, the definition. For the purposes of our conversation today, when I say the public, I'm talking about the unengaged public. These are people who aren't knowingly interested in policy at all, at least not in the area that you cover. That means we're not talking about insiders or political junkies, obviously, right? But it also means we're not talking about farmers who pay attention to ag policy or educators who pay attention to what's going on in their field, if those are the fields that you cover. It means we're not talking about people even who read headlines like everything you need to know about USMCA. Because these people, they don't think there's anything they need to know about USMCA. They don't even know what that is, many of them, right? So now the confession. If you normally write for one of these groups, you really can't just tweak what you do to reach this audience. One thing can absolutely lead to the other, and we're going to talk a lot about how that's going to happen today. But you really can't take the same story that you're producing for the engaged and magically also make it appeal to the unengaged. Please don't leave. I recognize that means that some of you won't often have opportunities to do stories like this in your current jobs, but I hope that by the time today is over, you will push for them when you can and look for opportunities to do them. And here's why. Oh, this thing. Is it working? No. Hang on a sec. Okay. There we go. Yeah, so that's what we meant by the public. So why do this? Why write for the unengaged reader? I will start with the practical reasons. Number one, it can help you break news. I'm going right for the hard sell here. Writing for the unengaged reader can show you your beat from an entirely new perspective. It can make you ask questions you would never ask otherwise. It can make you speak to people you would never speak to otherwise. It will make you look at data that you would never have looked at otherwise. And all of that can lead you to stories that nobody else has. Second, it will make you, or can make you, a better writer. Anybody ever had a little kid ask them to define a word like, say, cow? Because if you have, you know that the difference between being able to use a word with confidence and explain a word to somebody who does not have any context for it can be really significant. I'll give you a second to figure out whether you can define cow or not. Writing for unengaged readers makes you own the material so thoroughly that you can actually do the journalistic equivalent of that. You can explain what's going on and what it means using very simple words that everybody understands. And that is going to help you write with authority for absolutely anyone. The third thing this does is it helps create engaged readers. These stories are on-ramps. They show people the connection to your policy area, and they help them understand why they might actually want to read that explainer about the USMCA, right? And finally, even if you never write a story like this, understanding how they work and why will get you thinking about a question that can help you produce better, sharper stories, whether you write for insiders, outsiders, or anybody in between. And that is, who exactly am I writing for right now, and what do they need from me? These are some of the reasons that are good for, doing this is good for journalists and for journalism. But the other reason to write these stories is a little thing I like to call, it's vital to democracy. It's incredibly important. If people are going to be able to participate in their government in any meaningful way, they need to know what's going on, and they need to know what it means. And when they don't, well, I will offer you a well-known example of what happens, right? Everybody knows about this, do you? Right? What we don't want is them finding out after the fact. Anybody have questions so far? Okay. So what kinds of stories will these people read? Two kinds most reliably. The first kind is really emotionally compelling stories about people they can somehow relate to. And in a little while, Sarah Cliff is going to talk to you about those and how to report and write them in a way that has real impact. The second type is stories in which the reader themselves or somebody close to them is the main character. And that's the type of story I'm going to focus on. And we're going to start with a few examples. Okay, so let's say at some point in your day you encounter that first headline. What's your reaction? Anybody? Yeah, very first one. Trump wants to extend his tax overhaul. What it means for you? Nothing. That's my reaction. Means nothing for you? That's my reaction. Okay. That's my reaction. Anybody else?
I would say most people really could not connect to it.
Interesting.
It's somewhere out there.
Oh, interesting. Okay. When I read it, my reaction was, uh-oh, what does that mean for me? Right? What's he doing to my taxes? Or maybe you're a more hopeful soul, and maybe you read it and you thought, awesome, does that mean I'm going to get money back, right? Or something adorable like that. Anybody see themselves as a taxpayer when they read that? Yes, okay. But either way, whether you thought a good thing or a bad thing, many of you had an emotional reaction, right? And it led to a question. That's key for two reasons. First, from a purely practical standpoint, the emotional reaction is what gets people to stop scrolling, and the question is what gets them to click, right? So those of you who had that reaction and had a question, you're the people that this story is now talking to. So that's the practical reason. The other reason is that the people who have that emotional reaction, they're your audience. And the answer to the question, that's your story, at least for the unengaged public. Okay. Yep.
Could you just repeat what you said? The emotional reaction gets them to stop scrolling. And what gets them to click?
The question, right? So I think to myself, the example that I always use is, the headline is "The circus are coming to town." The circus is coming to town, and I say, "Yay! When?" Right? Emotional reaction question. That's a super important online for this kind of story. But in addition to the stopping them from scrolling and getting them to click, it also gives you information, right? And the information it gives you is, who am I speaking to and what do they need from me? So that's the recipe. That's the whole thing. Are you with me so far, ish? Okay. Let's look at a couple more. Why are so many people getting a meat allergy? Anybody have an emotional reaction or a question to that? Somebody in the back?
Yeah, I was wondering, are people having allergies?
Okay. Yep.
I have a number of food allergies, so I think, boy, here's another one I got to look out for.
Oh, here's another one I got to look out for, right? Like, what's this I got to look out for now, right? Anybody else?
Thinking about additives in the meat that might cause the reaction.
Say it again.
Additives in the meat that might cause reaction.
Additives that might cause reactions. So you're already trying to guess why. Okay. Anybody else? My reaction when I read it was, a meat allergy? How do I not get that? I don't want that, right? Okay, hang on just one sec. Notice also that in these reactions, the first one there was an I, or a me, the second one there was an I, right? This is what I meant by the reader or someone close to them is the main character. When I read these headlines, and some of you too, I see myself in them. I recognize myself in these stories. I think, hey, I'm a taxpayer. Hey, I like meat, right? This is me they're talking about. That's what we mean when we say that the reader of these stories is the main character. Or sometimes it's, their kid, their brother, but somebody who is directly connected to them. How about the next one? Let's pretend you're all New Yorkers for a second. And what's the next one? What's your reaction? Anybody?
That's outrageous.
That's outrageous? Do you read it? Do you read that story?
Yeah,
Why?
because it seems so unjust to me. It seems so unfair. I want to know why.
There's the question, right? You had the emotional reaction, which is that's outrageous, and then the question is, why are we doing this, right? Why are they doing that? Anybody else? Yep.
Mine was more towards your second point, is that I could have a personal connection with my neighbor being kicked out.
Say it again.
Like say a neighbor
Mm-hmm.
being, and why would they be kicked out?
Right. Okay, so yours was similar to mine. So, sorry, I used to be a New Yorker, and so if I still lived there, I would have thought, uh-oh, what can the cops kick me out for, and am I doing it? Right? My parents still live there, so my reaction was, uh-oh, what can they kick my parents out for, and are they doing it, right? And so in that case, not only was I moved to stop and click, but I might also, depending on the content of the story, be moved to share, right? Because if it's information that I think will be useful to them, I want them to have it too. Somebody's hand up. Yep.
Yeah. Question is, how much almost emotion do you want to put in your lead in there? For example, the first two are a little bit neutral. This one, suggests. Thank you. Turn the mic on. Is it on now?
I don't know.
I don't see it. Okay. Well, the lights.
Yeah, that's good.
The light's on. Okay.
There you
go. Wow. How much do you want to use as a hook, putting kind of more emotion in your title? For example, I mean, the first two said I think are relatively neutral. But what would you want to say? Trump wants to screw the middle class again in his tax overhaul, or do you want? Because the third one seems to me starts maybe to get your emotions a little bit, because if you're a real law and order person, you may think, well, here's the newspaper coming down on the local cops again. You know, what is this fake story? I mean, how do you play with emotions in a title?
That is a long and complicated question with a long and complicated answer that probably could have its own seminar. I would say that it depends on who you're writing for. It depends on who your sort of more your more regular audience is. It depends on the content of the story. I mean, it's hard to answer that in the abstract. But we're going to look through a bunch of examples, and actually the main example that we're going to talk about today, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on the level of emotion that's there when we get there.
Yes, I have one more. That's on the NYPD headline.
Yep.
I'm thinking greedy landlords pushing tenants out of their building so they can Airbnb their property and make more money from it.
Could be.
And you know, the people haven't committed a crime, but it's the landlords.
That could be so. Does that curiosity make you want to click and read the story? I will just say, though, for the record, that this is not a random sampling of the public. You are not the public in this sense in any way for many of these stories. So that kind of thinking, right, where you're already trying to game out what's inside that story, that's a very reporter thing to do. And you know, other people do it too, but most people are not going to have. Most people are not going to be bringing all of that sort of background knowledge to a headline like this necessarily. Okay, and the next one, similar, right? I read that and I think like, oh, great, that's useful. What are the new rules? And maybe also, and I will share this with my spouse who texts and drives, and maybe they will stop now, right? But let's look at the last one for a second. How your chicken dinner is creating a drug-resistant superbug. What is your emotional reaction there? Yep.
Like the coronavirus wasn't enough.
Anybody else? Yep.
My chicken dinner.
Maybe.
Pork
Yep.
chops tomorrow.
Pork chops?
Tomorrow, yeah.
Okay.
My chicken dinner wouldn't dare.
Yep.
I guess again, it's what you bring to it. I think, okay, well, here's another article, the overuse of antibiotics.
Okay, so again, you're bringing a lot of background knowledge to that, right? I read that and I had an emotional reaction to it. I thought, oh, fantastic. That was my emotional reaction. My emotion was defeat.
Mine was, I might try organic chicken now.
Oh, well, you already jumped to solving the problem. But that headline actually didn't really leave me with a question. It kind of, that how seems like a question, but it actually led me to a dead end. Because I don't really need to know how my chicken sandwich is going to kill us all if that's what's happening, right? It's not really. But what if it had said, your chicken dinner is creating a drug-resistant superbug. Here's what you can do about it. Would you read that? Be more likely or less likely? Okay. Can anybody tell me why? Yep.
Well, it initially inspires fear, but then it offers a solution. So there's actually a reason to click.
Right. So fear or bad news without any avenue forward, right? That's not something that people generally like to indulge in for 4,000 words or however long that story is going to be. Okay. So more on that shortly. Any other questions before we try this out on a story? Okay, so let's do this. Our starter dough, so to speak, is a policy story that isn't written for this audience. USDA changes Obama-era school lunch rules, citing flexibility. Now, just to be clear, I'm not suggesting this story should have been written for this audience. This story was written for the people it was written for, and that's good, that's fine. This is not a critique of that. But I'm sure everybody in the room understands the politics behind this, right? This is the administration chipping away at Michelle Obama's signature achievement. I think they announced it on her birthday, which is a nice touch. And because you understand the backstory, you also probably can guess that the change more likely favors pizza than peas, right? But unengaged readers, they're not with us. We lost them at USDA, right? But there's actually important information in here for some of them. So let's start by talking about which ones. The first question to ask always, when you're looking to see if there's a story for the public hiding inside a story that isn't, is who cares about this or who should, and why? And over the years, I've realized that the why is actually the most important piece of that because it tells you who's really got skin in the game. So let's give it a shot. Anybody? Who? Parents. Okay, all parents? Parents of school-aged children. All parents of school-aged children? All public school parents of school-aged children? Okay, there we go. So now we're focusing in, right? Parents whose kids eat lunch at school, but why? Why does it matter to them? Anybody? Children's nutrition, that's one reason, right? I want my kid to eat nutritious food. Other reasons that it might matter? How about because they want to make sure there's something in the cafeteria that their picky eater will actually eat? Or because they want their kid to tank up on calories at school because it saves money, right? There's a bunch of reasons. Anybody else can think of more?
Obesity issues?
They want to, right, they don't want their kid to have too many calories at school. Anything else?
Kids who might be allergic to something.
Allergens, right, or dietary restrictions. My child is a vegetarian. Our family is, Muslim, or observes other religious dietary restrictions, right? There's a whole range of reasons why that subset of parents might care. But the overall reason they care is because what their kids eat or don't eat at school affects their lives directly. They're trying to do a thing over here, and now they're changing this, and they want to know, is it going to make it easier or is it going to be harder, right? They have a practical stake in what their kid gets fed in the cafeteria, and that gives them an emotional stake. Again, practical stake, right? Emotional stake. So really, the audience isn't even parents whose kids eat school lunch. It's more like parents who care what their kids eat for lunch in the school cafeteria. You with me? Okay. So how would you frame a story for them so that they recognize themselves in the headline? And they understand their relationship to this information? What might that headline look like? Should we give it a shot?
Our school lunch is meeting your child's needs.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
Do you want to repeat that?
Our school lunch is meeting your child's needs. And remember, this is a change that's happening too, right? Yep.
Your child's school lunch options are about to change. Here's what it means for you.
We have a winner. We have a winner, right? And you got there a lot faster than I did. Right. They're changing your kid's school lunch again. Here's what it means to you, right? That's a frame that can speak to that group of people.
Question.
Yep.
You're really looking, when you're writing something that long, it's really for the web, not for
Yes, a headline like that. Well, it depends on what your print format is. But I didn't pay too much, as a former headline writer, I apologize, but I didn't pay too much attention to the specs of these headlines. If I had to fit them in something, I would play with them until I could figure out how to make them fit. But that's going to vary so much depending on the context that you're writing in, that it didn't seem like that was the thing to spend a ton of everybody's time on. Yes.
Would you, and this seems pretty straightforward.
Yep.
Does it help or hurt to be like pizza for lunch again or something like that? Where like you're as opposed to like, oh, it's a change. Like, oh, it's junk food or something less healthy.
Well, it depends on who you think your audience is, right? Because who is the audience for pizza for lunch again? Think about it.
grade school parents.
But what is their practical and emotional connection to it? Maybe overweight or people who are concerned about the nutritional content of the food, right? That's a subset of the people that we're talking about. So in some ways that feels like it's sexier, but on the other hand, it actually is a little narrower. So it depends, again, on what you're trying to do. Anybody else? Okay. So if that's your headline, then what's the emotional reaction? Emotional reaction, and what's the question? It's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. Mine was, oh boy, now what? Right?
Could you also say, what can I do?
Well,
What can I do about it?
possibly, right? Depends on what we find out about this story. Hang on to that idea. More is coming. More is coming. So if that's the frame, right, what is the content? What does the reader who clicks on this story want?
What they're changing,
Say it again.
what they're changing,
Right. What are they doing? What else?
when are they doing it,
Sure.
why
Yep.
are they doing it?
Do I want to know why? How much do I want to know about why?
How will it impact on my family?
Right. Okay. So I would say they want to know what for sure. They want to know what it means for me, right? They probably want to know when. The why gets into like a little bit of a trickier territory because it's less crucial to understanding what the direct effect is, right? In the back.
The why might take you to what is the science behind this decision. The why might take you to what is the science behind this decision. I mean, guess it depends how, lack of a better term, sophisticated you want to get with your reader, but.
And that's a question. If I'm the reader and I'm there because I know that you're making a change in the cafeteria and I have a personal interest in what is or isn't served, how deep do I want to get?
It depends on whether you want to try to change it.
Okay, but now we're moving into sort of a different question, right? At least for the meat of this particular story, right? And this is actually something I'm going to talk about a little bit later, but the difference between story and topic, right? Because this is a broader topic. There are many stories that could be written about this, right? And in fact, there is one that we started with that isn't quite this, right? So there are many, many ways that you can look at this change and many different audiences that you could write for. And what we're trying to avoid when we're writing for the general public is putting all of that in one big story. That is not what they're going to respond to best. What they're going to respond to best is something that's sharp and focused and that speaks directly to them and that gives them utility. So that's what we want to try and want to try and focus on. Yep.
I would want to know if there are going to be options within this that I can work with.
Okay. So that piece of it, the what it means to me piece, that actually is probably going to be a bit tailored depending on who you are, right? So those categories that we were talking about before, will this help my kid find something they're willing to eat? I want my kid to eat healthy. How will this affect that? My kid's an athlete who needs to tank up at school, otherwise they're going to bonk during their race, right? All of these things. These could actually be subheads within the story. And if you wanted to, if you work for the right outlet or you have the right social media following, you could actually crowdsource this. And instead of trying to mind read what people want, you could ask them and have the story be responsive to what they actually want to know. Yep.
Also, it depends, like, if it's a community newspaper or Washington Post.
Of course.
It's going to be really different. I'm sorry, say it again. Okay. It depends on the outlet and the community, because a community newspaper would probably have a much more passionate headline.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Yes. And also, if you know what the actual direct effect on your specific community and your specific school is, that's a different story too, right? This is sort of the general what we know, and we're going to get to that piece of it later as well. Okay, so here's another question. And we started getting there a minute ago. What doesn't this reader want to know? What doesn't this reader need in their story? Can anybody think of anything? Politics is one, yes. Anything about Michelle Obama or her birthday? What else? yeah, the information about the farm subsidies, the name of the Secretary of Agriculture and how he feels about this. General self-serving quotes from the administration, general self-serving quotes from advocates, people talking about the importance of school lunch. They don't need any of that. They don't need to know the acronyms of school lunch bills passed, right? It's a whole bunch of things that we might put in a story for a different audience that this group of people, not only don't they need it, but it's actually going to get in the way of their understanding and their ability to use the information that's in it. The point is, again, that you want to produce a really sharp, focused story that is responsive, right? It's responsive to the audience that you're writing for, and that and one that leaves the rest out. Are you all starting to see why it's hard to take a story that's written for engaged readers and tweak it to make it work for the unengaged? Yes. Okay. But wait, there's a plot twist. There's a plot twist here. When I read this story, I learned that this headline actually glossed over a detail that's pretty important to this audience. And much of the coverage of this did, actually. The USDA hasn't actually changed the school lunch rules. They've announced proposed changes to the school lunch rules. And okay, policy reporters in the room, what comes between proposed changes and changes? Anyone? Anyone? A public comment period. Well, how about that? If there is a German word that means a mix of fury and excitement, this is what I felt when I read this story. Because this is the moment when democracy is supposed to happen, right? This is when people are supposed to get their say in what government is doing for them or to them. And most of the coverage either buried that or just leaped over it entirely. And that happens all the time. And I'm going to stop and say, this is one of the reasons why it's so important that these stories get written. And they used to get written a lot more often before newsrooms shrunk and resources were less. But now when I went to do the work to try and prepare for this program, I was shocked at how little there is out there that actually conveys this kind of information to people and lets them know what the opportunities are for them to actually have a say and engage with the government when that's what's supposed to be happening, never mind when it's not supposed to be. So this revelation demands a different story, right? Something more like this. Oh, yeah, that is the information box way down at the bottom of the fact sheet on the USDA's website that I discovered. I was like, oh, hey, look at that. So, right, now we have a bit of a different story. There's a plan to change your kid's school lunch. Here's what it looks like and what you can do about it. Remember what I said about the power of what you can do about it? So now what's the emotional reaction in the question? Anybody? It's what are they doing and what can I do about it if I hate it? Or if I love it, right? The story doesn't have to necessarily take a side. But the point is, now instead of being resigned, I'm engaged. And that's really important. And what's the story those people want? I threw some thoughts up there just to get you started, but you see the general frame, right? You're giving these people the information they need to decide what they think about this change, whether they want to take action, and if so, how to do that. Everybody's pretty much going to want to know the answers to the first two questions, right? What are they changing and why? And again, they'll want to know with as much specificity as possible, what will the changes mean for my kid's lunch? But once they know that, and this gets to how much information you put in there, right? Once they know that, they will also know that one of the main stated reasons for this change is reducing food waste. That's one of the things the administration says that they're trying to do. And so now they'll probably have questions about that. It's like, oh, okay, well, they're doing this thing. They say it's going to reduce food waste. I probably have feelings about food waste. Maybe I don't like it. And so now I want to know, well, how much food waste is there? And how much is that costing us? And what exactly are the kids wasting? Are they wasting the things that they're going to get less of, right? Now I have questions. Will these new rules help? They might want to know, have other things been tried other than serving less fruit and vegetables to reduce food waste? And in this case, the answer is yes. And what you could do is link out to other stories. because there's coverage out there about different efforts to reduce food waste. California is doing a thing. There's a bunch of stuff out there. So you don't necessarily have to go into a full sidebar there. You can link out to other stories and let people who want to go deeper, go deeper. And a little later, Ben Weider is going to talk about the data piece of all this, including how you might source and slice state-level data so that people could see how big of an issue school food waste is in their particular state, and that might wind up in this story. It also might wind up in a different story, right? And then the audience would be slightly different, which is that people who are engaged with that piece of it. But once they've developed an opinion, we want them to actually use, if we want them to actually use the information that we've given them, we need to tell them really specifically how to do that. So how do we do that? What would we include? Yep. That we definitely want to do that, but now I've gotten all the answers. You've told me all the things I need to know. So now I've formed an opinion, and my opinion is, I hate this. This is a terrible idea. So now what? So yes, one of the things certainly would be to link to the portal for the public comments, right? This is an opportunity. This is one of those cases where the internet is actually wonderful, which is they don't have to, it's not TV where they have to write down a thing and do it later. It's not the radio where they're in their car and they can't make a note of it. It's right there in front of them, right? The public portal is right there. So yes, include the link. Let them know when the public comment period ends. Let them know when the rule is expected to become official if we know, so people can check and see what happened. And here there's actually another potential action point. This rule would loosen federal standards, but that doesn't mean that schools actually have to lower theirs. In theory, states could provide supplemental school funding and keep the current standards. They could just pay for them a different way. Schools can decide actually unilaterally to make that decision and seek funding some other way. So there's a second action point if they don't like the outcome of the first one, which is that they could lobby their state, lobby their school, organize parents, right? There's a lot of potential for democracy here. Okay. I'm going to stop and take some questions and objections, because if you don't have any by now, you will be the first journalists I've ever spoken to who did not. Will that be true?
Wait for the microphones, though.
Any questions? We've been taking them throughout, so don't feel obligated. Yes.
That's a really good example of a story that translates well to unengaged audiences because lots of families have kids.
Yep.
But when you're writing here in Washington about more esoteric policy that will affect people's lives, but it gets really hard and it's not as directly connected, what do you do with that?
So the answer to that is not every story that you write is going to have a translation. And it's less about hoping to repurpose everything that you do and more about what you just said, which is that it's going to affect people's lives, but it's esoteric and looking for opportunities. I'm going to talk about that in a minute also. Looking for opportunities to step back and say, maybe this is something that people should know about right now, right? There's a long arc in many of these things, but there are moments in that arc where it makes sense to sort of put that out to the people who are going to be affected by it. And you're right, I mean, it will vary from policy area to policy area.
I cover satellite navigation.
Say it again?
I cover a very technical
satellite
area,
navigation.
GPS.
Yeah.
Probably everybody in this room has at least one GPS.
Yep.
Most people have 2 or 3 and don't know it. And GPS underlies the entire economy. But there are things out there that could change the reliability and could mess with stuff. But that's as easy as it is to explain. And then you get down into the esoterica and what people may or may not want to consider doing about it.
I would have to know a little bit more. I would have to have a little bit more of a specific example, but I would argue that there are probably moments where you don't need to get into the esoterica and where you can present to people the change, but also the implications of the change in a way that they can understand. And that's the moment that you want to think about writing that story. And I realize, time-wise, I want to workshop something with you, but I also have many other things to tell you. So let's see if I can get through them pretty quickly.
One question.
Yep.
On something like that, would you want to start a story with kind of a story?
Yep.
Maybe, someone out hiking in the woods and the GPS isn't working and, something that people can associate. That you pull them into the story because you give them a real life experience that they might associate, and then they're more willing to get into the esoteric.
So after me, Sarah is going to talk about when and how it makes sense to actually humanize a story like that. I will tell you in advance that I am 101% sure that taking a straight-up policy story and putting an anecdotal lead on the top of it is not going to be what she tells you. And this kind of story is a story that is not a story that is going to want something like that. There's a place for that, but this is not it. Okay. I will quickly add my own objection to the mix, which is, but the public just doesn't read policy stories, which is a thing I heard a lot from local reporters when I first started working with them. And it's true that there are a lot of policy stories that are written for the public that tank online. And the most basic answer to the question of why that happens is because those stories weren't actually written for the public that we've been talking about. They were often written for a mythical public who reads about policy because it's important and they should. And I wish they did. I really do. But honestly, even in this room, ask yourselves, how often do you find time to read random policy stories that are outside the areas you cover or follow? Right? And you're you. Even people who do keep up with policy news can't and don't keep up with all of it. They keep up with what captures their imagination or attention or serves their needs, right? What captures their attention, what serves their needs. So if your reason for writing a policy story is that it's important and people should read it, I would say think about your frame.
What should it be?
Say again?
What should it be?
What should it be? It should be who needs to know about this and what do they need to know, right? Who cares about this or who should and why? Very quickly, I will talk about some specific pitfalls that tend to hang up. They hang up a lot of stories, but they hang up policy stories disproportionately, in part because policy is really hard. It's really complicated and hard to understand sometimes and hard to boil down, especially on the fly, which I know a lot of you have to do. Lawmakers hire whole people to do this for them, right? Most of them don't even try to understand. And the other reason is because policy has a lot of important consequences, it tends to produce a lot of not great news, right? And by not great, I mean not bad journalism, but bad news. So what can we do about it? Jargon. Oh, there we go. I'm behind myself. Jargon. You know how people ask, do I have to watch season 1 and season 2, or can I just start? Okay, jargon locks out anybody who is tuning in for the first time. Insiders or political junkies, you can assume they're high context readers. You know they're all caught up on the series, or if they're not, they should be. Shame on them. And in fact, if you're writing for them, it would be annoying to them for you to retell the backstory every time, right? Again, why is it hard to write for the engaged and the unengaged simultaneously? But unengaged readers are low-context readers. They bring little or no prior knowledge, so you have to unpack the language completely for them. And as I mentioned earlier, this process will force you to ask stupid questions that will make you smarter, and I'll give you a quick example. Last night, I was looking at a transportation safety story, getting ready for this, and deep in policy. And the reporter kept referring to commuter trains. And it became clear that they didn't mean Amtrak, which initially I thought they might, because a lot of people use Amtrak to commute. But it never became clear precisely what they did mean. Was it just MARC, or did they mean Metro? I wasn't sure, and they were talking about rails and tracks and all these kinds of things, and I couldn't really make head or tail over the implications of it, and I kept looking for an example or looking for a definition, and nowhere was it found in the story. And it was extremely frustrating. And I'm sure the reporter has no idea that that phrase is not self-explanatory, because it's the air they breathe, right? It's the air they breathe. So when you write this kind of story, it forces you to get down to that level of granularity of understanding and explanation. Quickly, passive voice and weak headlines. Passive voice tends to take the emotion out of information, right? It's detached kind of tone. Again, we talked about the ways in which reporting this kind of story can deepen your understanding. And while it won't solve those problems 100%, it will, if you deepen your understanding, it will increase your confidence, which will increase your ability to assert your knowledge more directly, which will improve your headlines and your leads and your writing voice overall. Kitchensink stories, does everybody know what I mean by that? Right? When I was at National Journal, I would sometimes have reporters come into my office and say things like, I want to write a story about green energy and public health. And I would say, that sounds interesting. Come back when you know what it is. Because that is not a story, that's a topic, right? Talked about that earlier. And unfocused stories that are basically a story about a thing. Anytime you hear the word about, those of you who are editors, if you're in the room, that's a red flag, about. A story about a thing, those stories tend to really tank with this group of readers because they have no idea why they should read them. It's not direct enough. And the last one, compassion fatigue. There's just a lot of depressing news out there, folks. And stories that just make people feel bad, just make people feel bad. The antidote is action. And I think if there's something I can do, then the information is useful to me. And if the situation is hopeless, right? Well, my chicken's going to kill us all. What are you going to do? The good news is the approach that I just outlined helps with all these things. Are you sold yet? Okay, quickly, how do you find stories like this? The last step is to understand when and how to look for opportunities to write these kinds of stories. One of them is by talking to actual regular people, which Sarah is going to do soon. Another one is looking at data, which Ben is going to talk to you about. And another one is just getting in the habit of keeping the public in mind. Routinely asking yourself questions as you do your work, starting with who cares about this or who should, and why. If policy has implications for corn growers, it has implications probably for corn eaters. But in an ideal world, you'll actually go beyond that, because some people will write about the corn eaters, but who they won't write about is like the medicine takers and the plastic recyclers, right? There's a lot of ripples there. And people who cover something that granularly don't always take the opportunity to step back and realize when it's time to write a story like that. And that's the other piece of it, is the when, is to just keep this in mind at inflection points. And one of them I'm sure that you already do, which is moments when something passes. A bill passes, and so we write a story about what it means to you, right? But as I think you can see, you also really want to look for moments with the potential for civic engagement, right? Those opportunities for the public to participate in its participatory democracy, because otherwise, a lot of the time, they won't even realize they can. Okay. So in a minute, we're going to workshop a story that one of you sent me, and maybe do some other stuff if you have time. Thank you for passing those out. While those are going around, anybody have questions? Yeah.
I like the idea of an engaged reader, but I was more thinking, and I don't want to offend other people in the room. How about an engaged writer?
Tell me more. Say more.
Specifically, we had a lot of problems in family court,
Mm.
and not a lot of writers wanted to tackle on writing what really happens. They only write when, the person's already dead, and that's more pain in our chest when we read about it. And I think that if we prevent something to happen by educating the public
Mm-hmm.
on, hey, this is so, unjust. We need to call those people out, make it
I'm going to say something that might be a little bit unpopular. It's a little risky to say this, but injustice is tough. Sometimes people really respond to it, but sometimes it falls into the compassion fatigue department, right? There's a lot of bad stuff that goes on and a lot of things I could or couldn't care about, and why do I need to care about this one? And sometimes, again, Sarah's going to talk about this, there's a story that's so compelling that it rises up and really grips you. But a lot of the time, the stories are just terrible, but not in some way that grabs the public imagination. And I would say it's worth thinking about what the implications of this pattern are for the people that we're talking about, right? Take it away from, you should feel compassion for these people, and think about the ways in which it impacts people who aren't these people. It's worth thinking about that frame, because I bet there are ways that you could do it. Okay, we're passing around this story. Take a few minutes, couple, to read it quickly. We have a little time, right? Okay. Are you all close? Is this thing on? Okay, it is. So I want you to know before we start that this is a piece that was written by somebody in the room who submitted it for this purpose. So I appreciate that. I don't know if they want to be identified or not, but yeah. So my first question for you is, you read this story, thinking about what we've talked about, thinking about the audience that we're trying to reach. And I'm going to ask you the question, who cares about this or who should? Yep. Somebody who might be living around the place they're trying to build. Okay, yep.
It mentions jobs, how many jobs could be created, so people who are unemployed in that area.
Okay, so maybe people who are experiencing economic anxiety, unemployment in the area, potentially former coal miners, or people who care for them, people who are living in this depressed area which doesn't have a lot of industry, right? Right? And why do they care about it?
Because it's jobs.
Because it might be jobs, right? What about people who are advocates of solar energy or want to fight climate change? Are they the audience for this? They are an audience for a story, but not for that kind of story, because those people are already engaged. I actually was talking to this, my daughter is a climate change activist, and I was talking to her about this last night, and when we talk about the headlines here, I'll tell you what she said. So if we were going to write a story for these people, can we do that yet? Based on what's in here? What do you think?
Yeah.
What would we write?
Basic possibilities.
So you'd write a story about possibilities. So this
yeah,
thing could
basic
happen.
possibilities, yeah.
Okay, but let's think about the arc of this, right? We're talking about the arc of policy and how it's long. You could write a this thing could happen story probably every day from now until when? So the question is, when is the moment? When is enough information available that you can actually tell somebody something meaningful about what's going on here? Because I think the answer is absolutely at some point. And if I were the person who was following this, I would be keeping that in the back of my mind and waiting for that moment. But this is still pretty preliminary. A potential moment of action here is to let people know that they're piloting this, right? Which it sounds like they are. And say it again.
Shovels in the ground.
Shovels in the ground. But they're not going to want to know every turn of this. Just like they don't want a kitchen sink story, they do not want every turn of the screw story about this. They want to know when something happens that's going to make new meaning for them around this. That's what they want. Right? Do we know yet what the potential is for jobs? It seems like there's some projections about it, but they haven't even figured out if it's cost effective yet. Right? So this is a kind of thing where there is a story in this topic for this group of people, no question. And now I'm waiting for the pieces to come together over time and the moment when it's going to be enough to actually say something meaningful and useful for this group. And what's interesting about this, what I was going to say about my daughter, is, well, let's think about what a headline for a story like this might be once we actually knew what we were talking about in terms of the implications for them. Anybody? What kind of a story do you think it would be? You were there. You were close. We're in the new jobs for coal company, right?
X number of jobs projected from solar on coal mine.
So for this group of readers, would you say solar? I don't know if I would. I might not. My attempts were new jobs in coal country at mines that have already been shut down, right? New jobs, right, could be coming at this point. And I don't love could be. I would love it if we actually knew that there were some. But that's a headline that's going to speak to this particular group of people. And what's interesting about it is you can't write a story for the engaged reader and expect the unengaged reader to read it. However, you can write a story for the unengaged reader and have engaged readers read it. And in fact, the more engaged they are and the more expert they are, the better they are at seeing themselves in a story for the unengaged reader. So my daughter last night, who's a climate change activist, when I said to her, tens of thousands of new jobs in coal country at mines that have already been shut down, I said, would you read that? And she said, oh yeah. Why? Because she knows that has implications for her. She's already engaged. She knows that that could be good news, that could be bad news. Are those jobs that are going to move people out of coal? Are they reopening coal mines? What's going on, right? And the more expertise people have, the more they are able to project themselves into a story like this. So these are actually, in some ways, broader than the other kind that you're talking about. Yep.
What would you think of like Virginia, Virginia created new jobs in coal mines in West Virginia too, something like that. If you're in West Virginia, is that?
Was the pilot, was that in West Virginia? Is that?
One well-known project in the former surface coal mine is 2.5.
Yeah, you know what it didn't tell us, though? It didn't really tell us much about the jobs, so I didn't go there. But if we knew that, then you could go there, right? That's more of a local audience. And so if you have access to a local audience, I'm sure they would like to know what that job is, right? That what that situation is, right? This is going on here, and it could come to your closed coal mine, right? I would want to know that. But yes, people who know more can see themselves on stories for the unengaged. People right? And that's important. Other questions? Yep.
Would you use a title that, like, new uses for old coal mines, and just leave it hanging there so people might have to look? They see new with old, so they assume it's something different. But, I mean, you do something short like that.
Who cares about that or who should?
Environmentalists who are worried about coal mines.
So new uses for old coal mines, or people who own coal mines who don't know what to do with them now. That's,
Well, I think it's also, I mean, this is getting too specific, but there's a lot of toxins left over from coal mines, and they're trying to convert them into greener jobs. So I would maybe say something like green jobs arise from former coal mines or something like that.
for the audience that we're talking about or for a different purpose?
I thought we're still talking about the environmental audience.
Okay, so if you're talking about an environmental audience, but again, that's a more read-in audience than the, you know, the local types, right? So then it's a slightly different kind of story. There was something else I wanted to tell you about this. Oh, I know what it was. It was that one of the objections that you sometimes get is people think, oh, if I dumb down my story, my sources won't respect me. You know, I won't, if I write this kind of thing, my normal readers will wonder what the heck I'm doing. And it's important to realize that a lot of people in the policy world, a lot of the insiders, are used to talking up here above the heads of the public, above the heads of their constituents, above the heads of the people who are actually going to be dealing with the implications of their decisions. And I had a reporter once say that to me directly, and what I said to her was, you're not dumbing down your story, you're democratizing the information, that's number one. And number two, if you think your sources and your readers are going to respect you less for writing these stories, you're saying the quiet part out loud. You're releasing the information to a whole bunch of people who now can apply pressure and have opinions and, you know, make a comment in the public comment period. They will not fail to respect you. They will fear you, and they will fear you in the best possible way. And they will also recognize themselves in these stories. Yep.
I suppose with the caveat that you're not appealing to people's worst, like the bad sides of people, or being excessively fear-mongering.
Oh, yeah, and I'm not suggesting that we're trying to stoke unreasonable fear. I'm just saying that oftentimes the parties in the policy negotiation are used to negotiating up here, right? And not used to having people actually understand what's going on at opportunities where they could make their opinions known. And so that's power, right? As a journalist, that's power. Yes?
I found a lot of gaps of information that I don't know if this would be ready to be a story.
For this purpose, it's not. I agree.
No, but I mean, for example, it may offer jobs, but workforce development projects would have to be set up. What are the requirements? The environment, and I just read here that they can shield developers from previous environmental responsibilities. So if I was writing a community-based article, I would talk about possible opportunity, promises, opportunities, and provides challenges. But would that be too esoteric for the community?
I would say that I don't. If this were literally happening in your community, that's a slightly different question, right? We're sort of looking at this as a broader, right? So at the community level, then you've got different concerns and there's different stories to write because there's all kinds of specific, immediate implications to this, right? But you're right that I think the kind of story that we're talking about writing, more broadly, we're not really ready to write it yet with what we know in this story. There's more that needs to happen. But we can recognize that there's information here that people will want and will need once we have enough of it. This goes back to passive voice, right? There would be a lot of passive voice here because there's a lot of holes in the who and the how and the what. So I agree with you that I think it's not quite ready.
Would you use questioning in your title or your articles to write the story?
I wouldn't write the story now. I would
No,
wait.
but-
I would wait until I didn't have to use a question. Which is not to say that you can never write a question headline, because I'm a believer that sometimes you should write a question headline. But in this case, I don't think it's useful to say to people, could tens of thousands of jobs be coming to coal country for this audience? Right? They're like, I don't know, I hope so. Right. Anybody else? Okay, we are close to, yeah? Oh, yeah, I think we're getting ready to wrap up. If anybody has anything else before I do. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for coming. Thank you for staying. We're going to take a short break, and then after that, the fabulous Sarah Cliff, who I think just showed up, and who has read way more hospital medical bills than you have, is going to talk to you about humanizing your policy stories. And go have some water, and we'll see you soon.